Welcome back. G20 finance ministers and central bank governors have renewed calls for coordinated efforts to ease the current volatility and uncertainty in the global economy, much of it triggered by an ongoing tariff standoff. Meetings for the second time this year in Washington, D.C. on Thursday. Global trade tensions dominated the agenda. At the heart of it all is the escalating trade war between the world's two largest economies, the United States and China. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump further disrupted global markets by announcing sweeping tariffs on all trade partners. The aggressive stance has sparked fear of a major global economic shutdown, with some analysts warning of a potential recession on the horizon. To unpack this further, we're joined by Dr. Laurence Caromba, a researcher in the Humanity faculty at Maestra. Now, Dr. Caromba, very good evening to you. What were some of your key take-homes from the finance leaders meeting, the G20 meeting in Washington? Also considering, of course, topping that agenda, Trump's tariffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just as you said, South Africa co-chairing this meeting, going in, had, what we really would have liked to do as a country would have been to advance a developmental agenda and focus on the issues that that we really wanted to talk about, which is the cost of capital for African countries and how do we finance development and energy transitions and all of these goals that we would like to pursue. But of course, what happened is that the whole agenda has just been kind of taken over by this, I would say, really an impending global economic crisis that has been set off by the current U.S. administration and its trade policies and its implementation of tariffs against, basically every other major economy in the world, but as you say, especially against China.
And would you say that, I guess hijacked would be a very strong word, but the agenda has been hijacked. South Africa does hold presidency of the G20 this year, while we're also co-chairing that meeting as well. We aren't able to get our issues on the agenda. So would you say that it has been hijacked and the development agenda has taken a back burner?
It definitely has taken a back burner. It's maybe, I would say, maybe not hijacked. I would perhaps say that we've just been overtaken by events. The reality is that the trade issue is also vitally important to South Africa as well. We stand to lose out significantly as a result of the trade policies of the Trump administration. And of course, having a developmental agenda is really contingent on having a strong global economy as a kind of a precondition for that. It's much easier to get buy-in from the rich countries for things like financing for developmental initiatives, when there's the sense that the global economy as a whole is going well. And when you have a period of crisis, which is kind of what we have right now, then naturally, every country is going to retreat into its own shell. Every government starts to look out for itself. So in a sense, there's kind of no getting away from these trade issues, unfortunately.
Yeah. Now, there was also some consensus that the current trade would be re-looked to ensure fairer trade. Fairer trade to who and which type of countries?
That is an extremely interesting question, because that really is the essence of all of this. What is fairer trade? From an African perspective, we would say that a fairer trade system is one that would allow us to better exploit some of our comparative advantages in certain sectors where we are not able to. So the classic example would be something like agriculture, where less developed countries tend to be at more of an advantage because the input costs are lower than in things like manufacturing or services. And that's kind of like the first step on the economic ladder that countries build up to as they develop. But also, as we know, African states aren't able to take advantage of that because of subsidies from the US and Europe and Japan and so on. So we would say that a fairer trade system would be one that allows us to export those without having to face subsidized competition. Obviously, the Trump administration has a very different understanding of what they consider to be fair trade. Their idea seems to be that the US should be running balanced trade with basically every country in the world on a bilateral basis. And if the US has a trade surplus, or rather, if the US is running a trade deficit against any other country, then they consider that to be kind of like intrinsically unfair trade. And I think like almost every economist in the world would probably disagree with that. Like trade balances and surpluses arise due to the goods that are demanded and the goods that are supplied, right? Like if one country has a lot of one thing that another country really wants to buy, then the trade between them will be imbalanced. But that's not an intrinsic sign of unfairness. But in any case, this is really the debate that all the countries of the world are now having. Like what is fair trade and to who?
Yeah, and speaking of the US's idea of what fair trade is, at that meeting they also spoke about reducing increased trade barriers and trade tensions. Now, how will that be done, considering that the US, where these discussions were taking place, has caused much of this tension globally around this very thing of trade barriers and tensions?
Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously difficult to say, in part because US policy under this administration has been so unpredictable and uncertain. Where we've seen things like the US implementing tariffs and then walking back, and then sometimes, even the same day, even sometimes on a single day, you start to see like shifting back and forth on trade policy. The question, though, is what is going to be the ultimate effect of that? And I do think that it is quite harmful to the world economy overall, because the problem is that one of the big underlying drivers of growth in the world economy in across all countries is private sector investment. Businesses see opportunities, they invest, they create firms. It leads to the economy growing overall. The problem is that because of this uncertainty that we now have, it becomes very difficult to engage in any sort of long-term economic planning. If you're trying to establish a company and you're looking to build a supply chain, you have no idea whether new trade rules might come along next week that suddenly make your whole business model non-viable. So, and that's not just US firms, that's really any business in the world that is working with an international supply chain, which is a huge amount of them these days. So this is kind of what's acting as a drag on the whole global economy, really, in this current environment. And we're going to see as economic data comes out over time, we'll see how much of a drag it's having.
Yeah, much unpredictability and uncertainty. And just lastly there, Dr. Caromba, what commitment can we take from these talks, or are they just talks? And while not completely unusual, what should we also take from there not being a traditional communique or chairman's statement from the meeting?
Right. So the fact that there was no communique, I think it definitely illustrates the amount of division, the unusually high levels of disagreement, that they can't even agree on a sort of a symbolic list of nice things to agree on, which they usually can come up with something. But so that's kind of the bad part. The good sign, I suppose, if you want to look for one, is that the United States did participate in this G20 finance ministers meeting. So the US Treasury Secretary did participate. which differs from things like, the G20 foreign ministers meeting, for example, where Marco Rubio boycotted it. So we could say, at least in this case, the US did participate. But, the question of what US strategy is ultimately going to be, whether the Trump administration is aiming for whether this is all just like a negotiation strategy and it's all going to be walked back, or whether they're planning that this will be kind of the way that the world economy is just run from now on, and we all going to have to work with these tariffs. Fundamentally, nobody knows, and we will just have to find out.
Well, we will wait and see, impatiently so. Thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it. That was Dr. Laurence Caromba.